All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to the Sierra Club of Pennsylvania summer webinar series. My name is Jim Wiley and I'm the volunteer chair of the Pennsylvania Sierra Club. I'm sure we all well versed in Zoom etiquette by now. Please keep your microphone muted during the presentation. You're invited to introduce yourself in the chat box. Tell us your name and what county you live in. I expect we will have good representation from across the state tonight. If you have any questions during the presentation, please drop them in the chat. We'll have plenty of time in the second half hour to work through these and maybe open things up for discussion. Just a little context. In February of this year, the Pennsylvania chapter of the Sierra Club formed 8 conservation teams, as shown in this diagram. These teams can be viewed in the context of overall sustainability, climate change, and education about these broader topics. Of course, sustainability rests on the pillars of people, planet, and profit. And in Pennsylvania, we have a support system of staff and volunteers to help each of our teams with equity, political outings, and communications assistance, as well as legal assistance, the Clean Energy for All campaign, and a bit of grant funding for worthy causes. All 8 of the chapter conservation teams can be found on the Pennsylvania website, where you'll find each team's mission statement, priorities for this year, and all kinds of info on these, on the issues, areas that they're interested in, that they're focused on. And our volunteers, with the help of volunteers, and help of chapter and national staff. All of our teams have the general mission of looking at their respective issues from a statewide perspective, tracking relevant Pennsylvania policy and legislation, and supporting group and local volunteers working in this space. At this time, I'd like to introduce Richard Cole, who's a volunteer leader on the Dirty Energy team, who's hosting this webinar tonight. Richard?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Strategies for Challenging Pipeline Projects, the Mariner East and the Safety 7 case, presented by the Sierra Club Pennsylvania chapter. Say what's that? Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
Okay, great. So I'd like to introduce our panelists for today's webinar. We have George Alexander. He is a retired journalist and marketer. George is a member of the leadership team of the Del Chesco United for Pipeline Safety. Since learning about Mariner East project in early 2017, he's felt a calling to spread the word about the dangers of the pipelines and the environmental damage they are contributing to, and the corruption and regulatory failure that is permitting their construction. He has a blog called Dragon Pipe Diary that has become a respected source of information about the Mariner East pipelines. And we have Ginny Marcille Kerslake, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who is a resident of West Whiteland Township in Chester County, who has spent the past 4 years leading her community in the fight against the Mariner East pipeline project, and is now the Eastern Pennsylvania organizer for Food and Water Watch. And we have Nancy Harkins, who is a resident of Chester County and a member of Del Chesco United for Pipeline Safety. She's one of the Safety 7 complainants. And also we have Mary Obringer, and again, apologies if I am not pronouncing that correctly, who is not a speaker, but she will be pulling questions from the chat to answer or to ask our speakers during the Q&A. Mary is an outreach assistant at Project PT and has been working with the Halt Mariner Now Coalition since 2019. The Halt Mariner Now Coalition connects groups across the state of Pennsylvania working on the Mariner East pipeline. And with that, I will turn it over to our first panelist.
Thank you very much, Richard. So I'm going to share my screen now. And I'll get rid of the Zoom stuff that's in the way. Okay. So this is a picture of the Safety 7. You'll be hearing a lot about this group, and Nancy will be getting into the details of the complaint that they represent. Nancy is in this picture. She's third from the left. So what I will be doing is providing some basic background. Basically, what this is a pipeline export project, sending materials to Europe and the rest of the world. But from my perspective, it's really about the failure of regulation, the failure of the political process, and smart lawyers exploiting loopholes. And what makes it really bad is that it's putting hundreds and thousands of people at risk all along the pipeline, and nobody is taking that appropriately seriously. And the purpose is basically to manufacture single-use plastic. I'll be talking about this particular pipeline, the Mariner East, but other pipelines will you'll recognize some of the issues that we faced in your pipelines. I'll start with an overview here, and I will be comparing it with Falcon because I know there are a bunch of people on the call who are interested in Falcon, and it does have a good bit in common with Falcon. But we'll talk in general enough terms that what we say will apply elsewhere. Ginny will talk about our field work and how that works, and how you can do the same with your pipeline. And she'll also talk a little bit about regulatory work and work with politicians that she does. And Nancy will talk about the details of the Safety 7 complaint, which is at the heart of this presentation. So why is Mariner East important? Even beyond the people who are directly affected. So I'll be talking primarily about one approach that we have taken with Mariner East, and the Safety 7 case represents this. We talk about the risk to human lives, and for our purposes, that is a key element in our approach. But there are a bunch of other issues involved in this pipeline, as there are in other pipelines, and people who are interested in making sure a pipeline is done well need to pay attention to the potential for environmental consequences, health consequences from the fracking that feeds the pipelines, taking of land, air and water pollution that may go with the pipeline, and the environmental consequences, in this case, of the plastic that's produced. But for other pipelines, it will be air pollution or carbon footprint, all those things. And so there's you need to decide what's the most important for you, for your pipeline, and pursue that, but don't neglect the rest. Falcon, as I say, is similar in some respects, but different. It's single product ethane, whereas there are three basic products in Mariner East: ethane, butane, and propane. Ethane, though, is the main one. It's an interstate pipeline, which means it's federally regulated. Mariner East is considered for many purposes to be internal to Pennsylvania, so it's not federally regulated. Falcon is not considered a public utility, but Sunoco, which operates Mariner East, twisted the regulations enough to get it considered a public utility. Falcon is not for export, it's for production of plastic in Pennsylvania. And it doesn't go through suburbs the way Mariner East does. But the risk of explosion, which I'll talk a lot about, and the environmental damage and the plastic pollution, all of those things are in common with Mariner East. So where does the stuff come from that goes into Mariner East? Well, it comes from drilling for natural gas. When you drill for natural gas in Western Pennsylvania, you get a lot of other gases besides the methane, which is the main natural gas component. And the primary ones are ethane, propane, and butane. And of those, ethane is the most abundant. You can't leave those in the gas and put it in the pipelines as natural gas because it's too explosive. So what you have to do is separate it, and mostly that's done by cooling. They cool this mixture of gases to minus 120 degrees. And at that point, the non-methane components become liquid, and you can drain them off, and you are left with methane that you can put in the pipeline. That's all well and good if what you're after is the natural gas, but then you have three other components that you have to get rid of, and they're very difficult to get rid of. In the case of Mariner East, they discovered that there was a market for ethane in Europe. It was used there in refineries to make plastic precursors, precursors to styrofoam, polystyrene, and polyethylene, plastic bottles, and so forth. And so Sunoco found that it could obtain an existing pipeline that had been used for transporting gasoline and other refined products west, and turned it around to transport ethane east, ethane and these other products east. And they were put on ships, special ships, and shipped over to the refineries in Europe, which could use this material because the sources of ethane in the North Sea were running out. And so the refineries had excess capacity for this. Ethane is not like natural gas. It is not natural gas, and it's not like natural gas in that it is heavier than air. It's even more flammable than natural gas is, and it settles, if it's released, it settles in a cloud, an explosive cloud near the ground. When it's transported in a pipeline, it's under pressure, and it's under high enough pressure that it is a liquid and can be pumped. And that's the only way to successfully transport it. But what that means is the pressure is so high that if there's a leak, you get a very high pressure gas escaping, which will then pool until it reaches a point of ignition, something to ignite it. And that's extremely dangerous. To compare it with natural gas, so this is a picture of modeling of a cloud of propane. The model for ethane is quite similar. I don't have one available, but you can see that for a 12-inch pipeline, which is what Falcon is, if you have a rupture and a release, you get a great big cloud. It's about 1,500 feet long and even more than that in width. That's explosive. If you have the same rupture in the same size pipe and it's carrying natural gas, you get a very small area of potential explosion. You can see the little orange thing to the left, which goes a couple hundred feet downwind, but has almost no width to it. So what this comparison shows that for ethane or similar gases, the potential for massive explosion is far, far greater, many times greater. And within this flammable cloud, if it reaches its full extent and then is ignited, everybody dies. There's really no chance of surviving if you're in that cloud when it's ignited. And obviously all the structures are set on fire. There are very, very catastrophic consequences if something like this happens. The Mariner East pipeline runs through some very populous suburbs in the Philadelphia area. This shows the route to get to Marcus Hook, which is a port on the Delaware River, and ships from there take the ethane propane and butane around the world. A small amount is sold within the US, less than 10%, but almost all of it goes overseas. So this is an export pipeline, and it's a pipeline primarily for plastic precursors. There are no siting restrictions on pipelines in Pennsylvania, and you can see from this photo where Mariner East runs right next to a retirement complex with a nursing facility. This big building that you see here is basically a three-story nursing facility. If there were to be an explosion here, most of the people who occupy that building would not be able to escape on their own. And well, you can imagine the consequences. And there's no restriction on siting like this. Here's another example of the siting problem. The red line that you see toward the left of this image shows the route of the pipeline in the vicinity of Media, Pennsylvania, just to the west of Philadelphia. And you can see that a rupture at the point in the lower part of the center there would form a cloud that's shown by the white area here that would encompass a hospital, a fire company, a retirement community, a mall, a library, an elementary school, and that all of that would be within the flammable cloud and subject to explosion. And you can see there's hundreds of homes in there too. Another case where if there were a rupture and a cloud forming in the same way, this is at a very popular state park, Marsh Creek Lake State Park. There's only one road into this park from this side, and it crosses Mariner East. If there were a major leak at the point where the road crosses, not only would everyone in the park be in danger, but it would also be impossible either to get out or to bring emergency vehicles in, because when you have a rupture in one of these lines, the gas continues to leak out. It's all under pressure. It gradually expands until it's all burned off. And that's a matter of many hours. It could be 12 or 18 hours for the gas to burn off. And until it does, no one could get by that point. I have one example here to represent what Falcon would be like. Falcon doesn't go through quite as dense a suburban area as Mariner East does, but here's an area. The red line represents the Falcon route, and the white bubble there shows an area just to the west of Pittsburgh Airport. And a rupture here would endanger 60 homes that are close to the pipeline there. And this is a smaller bubble than I was showing for Mariner East, because Mariner East, I was showing 20-inch line. This is a 12-inch line. Still, if you can imagine 60 homes on fire, people dying, what do you got? What's the possible emergency response? It's really a hopeless situation. And with these pipelines, there's not a credible plan for warning or for evacuation. There is no reliable leak detection mechanism. Sunoco, which runs Mariner East, depends on variations in pressure, but in fact, variations in pressure are constant on these pipelines. And most of the time when there is a variation in pressure, the operator doesn't know if it's actually a leak or just normal valves turning on and off and things like that. Most leaks are found by the public. And if there is a leak, the first responders know that they must not enter the area where the flammable cloud might be. Their job is to keep people out, and anyone who's in there, they're on their own. Supposed to self-evacuate on foot. Can't drive out because that would ignite the cloud. So what's the current status of this pipeline? There are actually 4 pipelines which constitute Mariner East, 2 of them currently in operation. One is the very old pipeline from the 1930s that they first reversed to start getting these materials out of the Marcellus and down to Marcus Hook. Another one is composed of some new and some old components. We call it the Franken pipe. They call it Mariner East 2, but in fact, Mariner East 2 is a separate pipeline. And there are 2 that they are building along the same route, 2 and 2X, and both of them are still under construction. And in our area, Jenny will talk a little bit about what's happening with the construction of those. They're nearing completion, but some of the most difficult aspects of those pipelines are yet to be constructed. So I'll turn it over to Jenny now, who will tell you how we do our field work and how we relate to the regulators and the politicians. Jenny?
Thank you, George. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. Okay, that looks good. All right, so as Mariner East has been happening here in Delaware and Chester County since 2017, fieldwork has been a really important part of what we do. And as George started to say, it continues at several locations where construction is still incomplete. And I'm going to talk about the what, how, and why of fieldwork, and then use 2 current examples of this. So what is fieldwork? Fieldwork is basically the documenting and reporting on trouble spots. And Mariner East has given us no shortage of trouble spots. How do we do field work? Residents will see things happening in their backyards and neighborhoods and communities, and they will report them to community watchdogs. Either they'll contact us directly or make comments through social media. And then we'll go to the site and document what's going on. And we do that. You've probably seen some of our posts. We use photos and videos and live feeds. We've got a few people with drones. Sometimes we use different measuring devices like decibel meters, even just sometimes tape measures. And then if appropriate, we will notify regulators, which in this case is typically the DEP and or the PUC. Sometimes we'll call the local police, but just as importantly, we'll report to the public through social media, and we'll tag news outlets and elected officials. Why do we do field work? Well, it's important to have eyes on this construction. If we aren't there to catch them in the act, these things would largely go unnoticed and unreported. But it's more than just surveillance. It's also to educate people about Mariner East, to raise public awareness, to elevate the issue. People have a lot going on, and we need to keep reminding them that this is a very important issue in our communities and in our state. To engage the public, we want to make them care enough about this issue to take action and to give them opportunities to do so. And finally, to put pressure on those that have the power to take action, our regulators and elected officials. I'd like to take you through field work that we've been doing recently on 2 trouble spots in Chester County. One is in Exton in West Whiteland Township, where I live, and the other is near Marsh Creek Lake in Upper Euclid Township. So in West Whiteland, they're currently using auger bore on a short section. It's only about 300 feet long from Briar Road in Meadowbrook Manor neighborhood to the Chester County Library. And there are 2 key problems here for Mariner East: karst geology and a wetland. In this photo, you can see, I don't know if people's photos or pictures of themselves are blocking it there, but on the right, there are backyards and houses. And on the left, where the trees and the green areas, that's the wetland. And right through the middle of that is the bore path and the construction. So the geology here is karst that is weathered into a honeycomb-like structure that's filled with all kinds of voids and fissures and pinnacles. It's difficult to bore through, and it's also relatively unstable geology and prone to sinkholes. Also, in order to keep their bore pit dry to do this work, they need to pump groundwater out of this wetland and karst geology. And it's a lot of groundwater, more than they expected. It's 1 million gallons per day. This photo was taken at a time when they weren't pumping. And right here in the center of the photo, you see this thing that looks like a very dirty swimming pool. That is their bore pit. And it's filled with water. It's about 10 feet deep. The extraction of this vast amount of groundwater in the karst geology further contributes to sinkhole development. And all of this has led to problems on this section that they don't want the public to see. So over time, as we're there documenting this, we see them go to great lengths and heights, like you see here, to stop us from seeing. This is a case where a resident had a pole in their backyard with a camera on it to capture images for us and to report to us what was going on. And in response, Energy Transfer put up fences. And so he would raise the camera higher, they would raise their fence higher. It was like fence wars for a couple of weeks until the fence got this high. This is about 18 feet high, and it blew over in a wind. And they're just lucky that nobody got hurt. There's 2 small children that live in this backyard. So since February the 27th, we've been reporting and documenting on a series of sinkholes that have opened up along the bore path here. Today's sinkhole was the 9th and counting that we have reported on in this section. This photo shows the largest sinkhole of them that opened up on June the 4th. It was 23 feet long, and it was running parallel to the active Mariner East 8-inch and 12-inch lines. And in fact, it was mere inches from the active 8-inch line. You can see these yellow flags here marking the 8-inch, and the ones closer to the bottom of the screen are the 12-inch. And what you see them doing here is filling it with grout. It took, I think, almost, if I'm recalling correctly, 3 cement truckloads of grout to fill this. Here's another one from a sinkhole that formed on Monday morning. When we arrived on the wetland side of this construction at 9:10 in the morning, it was just a depression with some cracks around it. And 5 minutes later, while we were live feeding on Facebook, the ground opened up and swallowed this tree. I want to show you this short clip I took from that live feed. It's kind of dramatic.
Yeah, so this is sinking right now. It continues to sink. I'm going to try to zoom in here. Sometimes there we go. Yeah, there we go. There we go.
So we were able to capture that, and something I just learned is that Energy Transfer is trying to claim that that wasn't a sinkhole, that they were actually in the process of extracting a tree, and then they had to fill the hole. Well, we were right there, and we captured that. No, it actually was a sinkhole, and it was, it was a pretty powerful image. So we use these images and videos and live feeds to engage the public and to put pressure on the Public Utility Commission to take some action. We want them to halt those 2 active lines. This is a catastrophic event waiting to happen. They failed to take action, so now we're using our field work to put pressure on the county commissioners to take some action on this. Oops, there we go. We've also been documenting their use of grout in this wetland, which is a violation of their permits from the DEP and the Clean Waters Act. They've been using it extensively to fill the sinkholes and to pump grout underground to stop the flow of water into the bore pit. They haven't been very successful at that. The DEP, there's been, we have documented roughly 50 cement truckloads have been pumped into that area. The DEP is failing to act, so we're now putting pressure on our Chester County DA to use her power to halt this. This pumping of groundwater is causing troubles on its own as well, in addition to contributing to sinkhole formation. On April 4th, a resident contacted us because they noticed this plume of orange sediment flowing into Valley Creek by the Chester County Library. So this is a photo that we took when we arrived. And we traced the flow back through the wetland to the work site at Briar Road. I'm going to show you what we saw when we got there. So the water that they're pumping out of the ground at 1 million gallons a day is laden with sediment, and they need to filter it before they discharge it from their work site into this wetland and then into Valley Creek. The problem was that system failed. There was too much sediment and it was too fine for their filters and was passing right through. So we reported this emergency. We reported this through the emergency line to the DEP that day. This discharge of sediment into waters of the Commonwealth was a clear violation of the Clean Streams Act and their permit. But the DEP claimed over and over again that it wasn't a violation and allowed it to continue unchecked for 11 days. So for 11 days, we were there in the wetland documenting and reporting. We got the news outlets involved. This woman in the right here with a microphone and red boots, my red boots actually, is Susan Phillips from State Impact, who's been covering this extensively for years. We sent emails daily with all of these images and videos to the DEP and kept updating our state senator. And eventually we also contacted the EPA because the DEP was failing to enforce the Federal Clean Streams Act. And all of this had an impact because finally at the end of April, after saying it wasn't a violation over and over again, the DEP issued notices of violations for exactly what we said was going wrong, and they required a new filtration plan. Then when that filtration plan failed again in June, we were there to document it, and the DEP acted swiftly this time, and they halted construction activities and issued 2 notices of violation, one for discharge into this creek and one for illegal dumping of sediment into the wetland. They've resumed the groundwater extraction again and their construction activities, but instead of filtering it, they're now, and this is what this photo on the right shows, they got approval from our township, who had, at first had said no, but now the township is allowing them to dump all of this water and sediment into our public sewer system, which then goes downstream to a water treatment plant. So we're going to see how well that works out. But without our almost constant surveillance at this site, these sinkholes and illegal sediment discharge would not have gotten the attention of the regulators or our elected officials, and those notices of violations would never have been issued. Another Mariner East trouble spot is Marsh Creek Lake. After a series of early problems there with HDD drilling on this section, we got a hot tip late in the day, last August the 10th, that there had been an inadvertent return of drilling mud. Instead of being recirculated back into the drill pit, the drilling mud was being, had found an underground pathway and made its way to a creek that then went into Marsh Creek Lake. We grabbed our kayaks and paddleboard, 3 of us, and went out to investigate. Really quickly here, a problem they're having, it's a little bit of a similar situation, a different kind of geology, but also unstable, and having these fissures is a nice geology. They're at not so nice geology at Marsh Creek Lake, and also the wetland concerns. So because we got there quickly, right away, like we really caught them by surprise and before they had closed off the lake, this we encountered at the end of the arm where the creek was dumping into. You can see the water is just milky at this point with the drilling mud. And when we went onto the banks and walked in a bit, this is what we saw. The creek was flowing thick with mud into the lake. As it turns out, it was a large spill. Eventually, it was reported to be over 8,000 gallons. It advanced into the lake. You can see the plume of it here in this drone image that we got. After a few days, that settled to the bed of the lake where it still sits. But these first images and reports on the spill have been, to date, the largest reach that we've got on anything, any of our field work for Mariner East or any other way we've been fighting it. I woke up the next morning to see the Facebook post I put late at night had reached about 20,000 people, but eventually it reached 400,000 people, 127,000 clicks, and 18,000 comments and shares. But it wasn't just those numbers, it's that there were tens of thousands of people who previously either didn't know or didn't care enough about Mariner East to get involved. But they did care about Marsh Creek Lake. It's a treasured state park, a recreational area, especially last year during COVID. And it's also a drinking water reservoir. So by extension, that made them care more about Mariner East. Because of the inaccessible location of the spill site and access to the impacted arm of the lake has been cut off since August, we've really been hampered on our field work there. But having those early images and raising public awareness to such a degree as we did, we were able to get not only the press interested in covering this issue, this spill, but also state legislators from outside Chester County. They came to visit the site. A few days later, we had a big rally and press conference. And this led to almost all of our state reps and state senators from Chester County, our county commissioners, and several townships and school districts, all calling for the DEP to pull the permits for Mariner East once and for all and halting operation of the active lines. Unfortunately, the DEP did not go that far, but what they did do, thanks to all this pressure and awareness, is they ordered a permanent halt to HDD construction near Marsh Creek Lake, and they ordered Sunoco to do a reroute on this section. This would cause a year or possibly years of delay. So Energy Transfer is attempting to get approval for an open cut construction instead there. But because of the public pressure, again, we were able to have a public hearing and public comments on this. And we're waiting for the results of that. While all this may not halt the project, it will certainly cause delays and potentially very lengthy delays for Energy Transfer, which is not good for business nor shareholders. And by extension, it's not good for Mariner East. So I hope these examples have given you some insight into just how important fieldwork is to fighting these pipeline infrastructure projects. I'm going to turn it over to Nancy now, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts and answering your questions after the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jenny. Just oops. Okay, thanks everybody for joining us tonight to talk about something that's very near and dear to all of us. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our case, the Safety 7. We talk a lot about the Safety 7, the 7 residents of Chester and Delaware County who were involved in the filing the complaint, but there were also 4 other complaints that were consolidated with our case. There were 3 pro se complainants, 3 individuals, 3 moms from Chester County who filed complaints, and they were called pro se complainants because they represented themselves. They did not have attorneys, which is a very courageous thing for them to have done. And the 4th case was from the Andover Homeowners Association, which is located in Thornbury, Delaware County. And they also filed a complaint. And our complaints were not identical, but the judge determined that there was sufficient overlap. They all focused on different aspects of safety, emergency planning, emergency response, and evacuation. the judge decided that they should be consolidated and go through joint proceedings. We filed our complaints in the fall of 2018. Like everything else, we were somewhat delayed by COVID, but it was going to be a lengthy process anyway. And we just received our preliminary ruling from Judge Barnes in April of this year. The judge confirmed some of the safety problems that were raised by the complainants, but did not require Mariner to be shut down until the issues were addressed, which is what we had asked for. Filing of exceptions in response to the preliminary ruling, approval of the final decision, and any potential appeals will take additional months. And we do not have a timeline yet on when we will know the final outcome of our case. While there is disappointment around the continued operation and construction of the pipelines, we recognize that any action against a corporate giant like Energy Transfer or Sunoco is a win. The judge agreed with the Safety 7 on a number of topics. The ruling was over 200 pages. I'm just going to go over a couple of those points right now. 2 currently active pipelines are not deep enough in some locations, and they are too close to structures or other pipelines. The emergency response measures must be reevaluated, and the judge went into great detail on actions that Sunoco needs to take in this area. Also, she recognized that the blast zone from a leak could exceed over half a mile. And this is really important because Sunoco has resisted any kind of acknowledgement of this previously. And what's really stunning to me, and it highlights what both George and Ginny have said previously, is that the permits were granted in 2017. It's 2021, and it took an action on the part of the public to hold Sunoco accountable to what is, I think, basic in terms of building a pipeline, where you put it, how deep it is, how close it is to other pipelines and structures, and what's the emergency preparedness. It really indicates the inadequacy of how we regulate this industry. Sunoco must inform the public that leaks from these lines can cause property damage, personal injury, burns, asphyxiation, and death, and they must use these exact words. And the judge also fined Sunoco a token $2,000. And it's really striking seeing these 2 bullets on the same slide, because there's such a disconnect between the severity of the harm that could occur and the triviality of the fine. But we know that fines of any amount really don't matter. Sunoco has already racked up a record number of violations and over $15 million in fines, which is nothing to them. And they consider that a cost of doing business in Pennsylvania. It has no impact on their performance. The case has brought to the forefront a number of issues that have the potential for positive long-term implications beyond our immediate case. And those include increased public awareness of the unresolved safety issues and Sunoco's especially poor track record. Also, current limitations of the PUC in enforcing public safety and in regulating pipeline siting, and inadequacy of PA laws and regulatory procedures to protect its citizens and their private property. I know that until I became aware of this pipeline, I was complacent about the adequacy of our regulation and our agencies to protect us. And increased awareness is crucial because right now it's up to the public. As Ginny has just demonstrated, it's up to the public to protect our communities and be on the lookout for dangers that are occurring. And it's especially important because any gains from our case will not necessarily apply automatically to other counties where Mariner is operating. The scope of our case and the standing for our complainants was Chester and Delaware County, and that will not automatically apply to the 15 other counties. So it's important for people to know what is coming out of our case and get that implemented in their area. And beyond the safety aspect, we've talked about in the environment, the environmental consequences, and the sole purpose of these pipelines is to facilitate fracking and produce single-use plastics. So any wins we have here will have an impact on the bigger picture. The momentum is definitely shifting. Ginny shared an example of where public pressure forces the DEP to take action. It's not just with the regulatory agencies. In a couple months ago, the Philadelphia Inquirer editorial board called on Governor Wolf to shut the pipeline down, citing our case and citing the issues that we've highlighted, the continuing issues. And that is really a significant change because up until recently, the Inquirer was pro-pipeline because of the economic benefits that were being touted. And now they've gone 180 on this. So that's one example that raising awareness and educating people is making a difference. Will it be enough? This is where you come in. You took the first step by being here tonight to learn more about Mariner East. We hope that you will take action in your community, either related to Mariner or to Falcon. A lot of what we talked about tonight is applicable to other pipelines or other oil and gas infrastructure projects. So I really urge you to learn more about local issues. Talk to your neighbors. One of the things we continually struggle with is the fact that people do not know what is happening with Mariner. It took the leak in Marsh Creek last year to get more people on board. We don't want it to come to that. So talk to your neighbors, join your local opposition groups, elect pipeline opponents, pro-environment candidates. You can follow our Support Safety 7 Facebook page to stay connected to us and to learn more. And we do have some additional resources for you. Halt Mariner Now is a statewide effort that we developed with Protect PT in the western part of the state because we wanted to have a statewide coalition. A lot of the material is specific to Mariner, but it can be applied to other pipelines or other infrastructure projects. And we already mentioned George's Dragon Pipe Diary, which not only has it become a respected source of information, it's also followed and hated by the industry. There's a link to it here. And if you still have questions or don't know where to get started, Mary has graciously provided her email address and offer to be a contact. So you can reach out to Mary and Mary will point you in the right direction. So thank you again for your time. And right now I'm going to turn it over to Mary, who's going to facilitate our questions.
Thank you, Nancy. And I want to say, first of all, thank you to all of our speakers for a very informative talk. And thank you to everyone who's here tonight and for the questions that have been put in the chat. I'm going to try to get to these in the order that I've seen them. And if I miss something, please let me know. And I apologize in advance. The first question that I saw was from Linda, and it was, while Ginny was talking about watchdogging, Linda asked, can you expand on which incidents are likely to get regulators to take action?
Yeah, I guess that's for me. The incidents that are going to, if you can find, if something's happening that's a clear violation of their permit or some sort of regulation, and that you can hold them accountable to that, and that's something. And then it's really, you might have to push and push, but like I said, get the public and get the elected officials to help you do that. But yeah, really, it's an incident that is a clear violation. They have to have something to work with and then push them to do so.
Thank you. The next question I saw was from Sarah, and it was talking about the karst topography. She says she knows that private wells are vulnerable and that there have been incidents of drinking water contamination. She asked, has EPA been approached about these occurrences, and did EPA respond?
I guess that one's for me again too. We have had some impacts on this project across the Commonwealth, not just in Chester County and Delaware County, to private wells. I'm not aware of any public well incidents. I know the question was about private. We have, as far as I know, maybe Nancy or George knows otherwise, I don't think the EPA has been brought in, but certainly the DEP has. But a lot of the times the DEP has failed to really do anything, and people have had to turn to their own lawyers to fight this in settlements, basically. But more recently, we have turned to the EPA when it comes to these violations of the Clean Streams Act, because they have something to go with. Again, going back to that last question, you have to give the regulators something that they can use, and they could use that. And can I just go back to that question, because I was only talking about environmental stuff before, but when the question was what incidences get them to take action, we also should look at the safety incidences. So the things that have shut this operation down before are especially in West Whiteland over on Lisa Drive, are when sinkholes happen and the pipelines are exposed. That is a clear thing that they take action on.
Thank you. The next question was from Lynn. She asked, does Sunoco have to create an emergency response plan soon, for example, by December?
I guess I'll take that one. No, there's no deadline. I would say there's no deadline. There are requirements in the ruling for them to cooperate with local authorities and with school districts to develop safety plans, but there is no timeline.
And Heather asks, I believe actually this is a question going back to what George was talking about. How did you figure out that the purpose of the pipeline is to transfer the highly volatile liquid gases for export?
So that's actually pretty straightforward, because Energy Transfer, so the Sunoco parent company, explained that in its quarterly conference calls with investors. And Also, the producers of wells in the Marcellus have discussed it in their investment conference calls too, because getting rid of these other gases has been a problem that at the beginning of the Marcellus shale explosion, if you can use that term, was something that they wondered if Marcellus shale would ever be viable as a source for natural gas, because what would you do with these other gases? So there has never been a question that this had to be gotten rid of. The only question was, how in the world could they do it? And they figured out that they could ship it overseas.
Thank you. The next question I see is from Christina. She asks how Chester County has model setback and buffer ordinances, but it seems difficult to get townships to adopt them. How can we get all of the townships along the line to adopt them?
Good question.
I'd like to say something about that. I don't have the answer to that, but one problem is not only adopt them, but then actually enforce them. We have a case where we do have a setback in my township, in West Whiteland Township, related to valve stations. And it was just decided in private by township staff to ignore that ordinance and let them put a valve station, which was in violation of it. So I think it's twofold. How do you get them to adopt the ordinances, and then how do you get them to enforce them? And maybe George or Nancy has some answers to that.
I wish I did have an answer to that. It's unfortunately my township a couple of years ago, I live in Weston Township, did adopt the county ordinance, but I did call it more protecting pipelines from people than the other way around. And it wouldn't apply in the case of Mariner. The problem that we have is that we're running out of room anyway. And that's a reason why there's pressure for municipalities and jurisdictions not to enforce the ordinances.
But it speaks to an important point where we need to have these setbacks, be it fracking or pipelines or pipeline infrastructure to keep us safe or safe, you know.
Right.
It could be huge, but the space just isn't there.
Exactly.
So
up
we're
until up until now, the solution has been, oh, forget the requirements, just shoehorn it in.
Thank you. Yeah, so our next question, how are you able to determine places where the pipeline was not buried deeply enough? I believe this might be in reference Nancy, when you were talking about Judge Barnes' ruling and how she had agreed with the Safety 7 that the pipelines were not buried enough in some places.
There is data where Sunoco has to provide that data. And I should have mentioned that we had expert witnesses who reviewed data, including confidential data that Sunoco did not want to make public. And in some cases, it's pretty visible, like when sinkholes occur, it's obvious that it's not very deep.
Yeah, and also as they're doing this construction, remember they're doing.
What happened?
Did we lose Jenny? Did we?
Ginny, you froze for a second. Would you mind repeating that?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So as they're doing this construction for 2 and 2X, those other pipelines are right there. So they have to go and locate them. So there will be markers all along these construction sites that actually show the location and the depth of those. So residents can actually see that. And that, you know, when I referenced that one sinkhole and said the pipeline was only 2 feet underground, we know that because there's a marker that says 8 inch, 2 feet underground there, and that's not buried enough. We also have cases here where the pipelines are actually 0 feet underground. They're exposed in stream beds, and a case in Euclid Township in someone's backyard. So we also know that way.
Thank you. Our next question I see is from Edith. How is Sunoco actually notifying the public of risks?
It isn't.
Well, they do have requirements to send brochures to the public. It's not just Sunoco, the industry. This is an industry requirement. And there are regulations around that. But there's a couple things. One, they were not distributing that information adequately in terms of measurement of the blast zone. So for instance, I live 1,100 feet from the pipeline, and I did not consistently get information because depending on what Sunoco deemed to be the communication zone, sometimes I was out of that. Now they've gradually been expanding that. And one of the things that's coming out of the ruling is that they'll have to expand it even further because the blast zone is greater. And that increases the population that could be affected. They do, you probably have seen things like this. It's just a glossy thing you get in the mail, and you would probably just toss it in the trash if you didn't know what it was. It looks like marketing material. And it basically tells you what George said, you know, in the event of a leak, run half a mile upwind, uphill. And it doesn't go into depth about the risks of impact. It tells you don't use a cell phone, things like that, but it's really inadequate. But it is something they're required to do. And we're expecting that that's going to be beefed up coming out of the ruling.
Thank you, Nancy. The next question I see in the chat is from Sarah. Did anyone request the data from the Marsh Creek spill?
Well, there is a PHMSA record of the Marsh Creek spill, and it's not particularly enlightening, at least my brief review of it. That may be the record that you're thinking of, Sarah. There also are records associated with the permit applications that Sunoco has filed in the wake of that that do shed a little bit of light on it.
And there was also data that was made available from the Environmental Hearing Board hearing last September, following the spill.
Thanks, Mary. Let me jump in here. I want to do a couple of wrap-up slides and stop the recording, but then as long as our panelists want to stay in and keep discussing, that's okay with me. I'll keep the Zoom line open. So let me just share my screen. I say thank you all for joining us tonight, and thanks to our presenters. This was a really great discussion. Here are a couple of important websites. I encourage you to engage with your local Sierra Club group. Find your group in the Get Involved section of the chapter website. And thank you again to the Safety 7 team and also the Dirty Energy team you can find on our 8 conservation teams on the chapter website. Here, let me go to the next slide. We'll be following up with a link to the recording of this session and any notes that we put together, particularly the information that Nancy had in her last slide. I'll put that in there. We'll also invite you to attend an upcoming Dirty Energy team meeting if you'd like to be on the lookout for that. So that's it. Again, thank you all for attending, and I'm going to figure out how to stop the recording.